will you introduce yourself? Sorry.
Jennifer Quinn. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Jennifer. Where are you?
I'm in Dallas.
All right, very good. Anything more specific? We're in Dallas.
So I'm in the great neighborhood of Oak Cliff.
Oak Cliff. All right. See, now we know where you are. Awesome.
Yeah. There.
Love Oak Cliff.
You want my I can give you my address.
Well, no, not no, because this is gonna go on the internet. So I mean, it's private. Only the people in the program can see it. But no, we don't want to do that. But I've come to Oak Cliff to go to restaurants and whatever.
Yeah, Bishop Arts, very popular.
Yes. All right, very good. Who's next?
Hi, Jennifer. My name's Lupe, and I live in Red Oak, so I don't live too far from you.
Not too bad. No.
Yeah, we live outside of Dallas.
I've been in your area before. I think games and things like that the kids would go to in Red Oak. Basketball.
All right, who's next?
Hi. I'm Shannon. I will go next because I might have to skip out here soon. I'm in Japan. I live in Nagasaki. So I'm not close to anybody.
And I've never been where you are.
Coming to my restaurants. Why is that?
Oh, I wish I could.
Yeah, me too.
Who's next?
Okay, I'm Julia, and I live in Mesquite, Texas, and I'm happy to be in class with all of you, and nice to meet all of you.
Very good.
Me too.
Harry?
Dr. Tardo,
Yes.
can we tell people that aren't speaking to put their microphones on mute? Because there's a lot of background noise.
Oh, okay. You're getting background noise. I'm not getting any. So,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah,
so yes,
we are.
everybody,
I
if
know
you
I
can
am.
mute yourselves if you're not speaking. I think it should be automatic. But if it doesn't, just go ahead and mute yourselves. Basically, you're looking on the left-hand side of the screen. If you hover over the window, there should be a microphone, and make sure that it's flashed, that there is a sign, like a line to it. Okay? So if you're not speaking, go ahead and mute yourself. Thank you. All right, so now the people in class.
So, do they hear us?
Yes.
Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Reza. I live in Commerce, just a 5-minute drive from the campus. And nice to see you.
Hi everyone, I'm Paige Van Spybrook. I live in Sulphur Springs, which is about a 45-minute drive from campus.
Hi, this is Susan. I'm Chinese and I'm the visiting scholar studying here in Commerce.
All right, very good. So let's get started. So I have two questions that have been asked in the class. So we need to go over those two first. So then, after we've done those two, then you can ask me other questions, of course. Unless there are any sort of general questions overall about the class that anybody wants to start with. Anything? All right, okay. Okay, so the first thing is the idea of modularity, and particularly the concept of module. Harry, you want to mute yourself because otherwise when you're flipping pages, you can hear them.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
Okay, here.
Left hand of the screen. Yeah, there you go. Very good. All right, so the idea of modularity. So first of all, it's complicated. Okay, so let's be very honest with one another. It's not something that that you can say, oh well, you know, we're going to you know, let me explain it to you in 12 seconds. It's fairly complicated. Okay, but not incredibly complicated. Okay, it's not like rocket science as the expression goes. So first of all, let's look at a non-controversial case. Okay, it always helps. But first, let me close the door. Sorry, we've got people walking in the hallway. So, do you remember from the chapter there was the example of the Müller-Lyer lines, right? The one with the line that the two lines that are the same length, but the top one looks longer and the bottom one looks shorter, or the other way around. I don't remember, but because one has the sort of the lines pointing outwards, and the other one looks like an arrow, right? An arrow at both ends. Right, so that when you have the lines with the arrow at both ends, it looks shorter. But whereas if it's in the opposite side, so you've got the line like this, it looks longer. Okay, so and that's a visual illusion, right? Because you can go in and if you print it on hard copy, take a ruler and measure it, you will see that the two lines are exactly identical. Okay, now once you've been told this information, and you look at the lines, you will still see them as longer and shorter. Okay? So everybody with me so far? Yeah. Right. Did somebody knock on the door? No, it's locked.
I didn't think so. Just,
Oh, is this your daughter?
Yeah,
She wants to be in here?
she is in the lab.
Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's good. So even though you've been told that there is an optical illusion and so on and so forth, you still cannot help but see it as longer and shorter, right? So that tells you that vision, the part of vision that deals with estimating the length of lines, is a module vis-a-vis cognition, right? Because even though you know that the lines are the same length, you still see them as not being the same length. Okay, so in other words, your knowing that they're the same doesn't stop you from seeing them different. Okay, now consider another example. Let's say that you get up in the morning, you look out of the window, it's maybe foggy, and you see something in the fog, and you say, "Oh my God, it's a centaur," right? It's a half horse, half human being in my backyard. Don't we all say that? Then you look more carefully and you say, "Oh no, it's a deer." It just looked like a centaur, but in fact, it's a deer, right? Once you've seen it as a deer, you no longer see it as a mythical animal, half man, half horse, right? You stop seeing it that way. You say, "Oh, I was mistaken. It wasn't a weird thing. It's in fact just a deer." All right? So what that tells you is that determining that what you're seeing is a mythical animal or a deer is not a module, right? That is, once you know that it's not a mythical animal, you say, of course it's not a mythical animal, and you can no longer see it that way. Okay? Have you ever seen those still, optical illusions, but you see like, if you look at the picture one way, it's an old lady, and if you look at the picture a different way, it's a young woman? Have you ever seen that? Or like a rabbit and, right. So once you know that, you can flip at will between the two images, right? So what that tells you is that interpreting the image as being an old lady or a young woman, or a rabbit and, what was it, a rabbit and a duck, I think?
I think so.
Yeah, a rabbit and a duck. It's not a module because you can do it at will, whereas seeing the lines longer and shorter is a module because you can't help but see that, right? So it's impervious to the knowledge of the world that you may bring to it. Okay? Okay, so that's a non-controversial instance of module. Okay, so are you still with me at this point? Very good. So now we go into language, right? And here The whole thing was started by Jerry Fodor, a philosopher slash linguist, who came up with this idea, and he said, you know what? In fact, when you look at language in humans, it's modular. Okay, and you know, and he called this the modularity hypothesis. So the idea is basically that the language faculty is encapsulated, right? And it's impervious to information from the context and so on and so forth, right? And of course, this became very popular as a view, because at the same time, Noam Chomsky was proposing roughly the same idea from the point of view of linguistics, the point of view of syntax, right? So Chomsky argued for an autonomous syntax, right? The whole idea was a context-free grammar. You may remember this from your English 555 class, or if you studied a little bit of linguistics at some other point, right? So the idea was that syntax operates by itself, right? That what makes us a sentence of English grammatical or non-grammatical has got nothing to do with who says the sentence or when the sentence is being said, that sort of thing, right? So if I say, you know, Mary is smart, is a grammatical sentence of English. And if I say smart is Mary, it's not grammatical, regardless of anything else, right? So then Fodor said that's because the language faculty in humans is a module. Okay, in other words, it's independent of the rest of the cognition of humans. All right, now, and then the rest of linguistics consists of people saying to Fodor, yeah, right. In other words, it doesn't work, right? And so the rest of the chapter, you will remember from the rest of the chapter, basically argument after argument saying it doesn't work that way, okay? Because in order to determine whether Jane is smart, or whatever my example was, is in fact correct or not correct, you need to know who Jane is, what smart is, and so on and so forth. And that information has to come from context. Okay, even to understand what is means, you have to have information from the context. Okay, so then because of this, lots of people have said, forget that, language is just not modular. You know, it's part of the general cognitive capacity of people. Okay, so then that's the discussion within linguistics is it modular or not? Okay, and the general consensus has been far less than what Fodor originally advocated is in fact modular. Some parts might be, and you know, then the discussion becomes which parts are and which parts are not. At this point, there is, you know, discussion that they found some genes that seem to be related to very specific linguistic anomaly, and we're going to talk about that in the last chapter of the book. And so that might be really, you know, literally genetically endowed in human beings. You know, then there was discussion that recursiveness was the one feature that was unique to humans. You know, well, it gets complicated and it's not particularly relevant to the class. Okay, but so the point of modularity is that it's the idea that the language faculty is a separate unit that functions without reference to other units. Okay, and of course, pragmatics, which is what we're dealing with, is almost by definition not sympathetic to this idea, right? Because pragmatics is the idea that you need contextual information to figure out what speech act you're doing, even to figure out largely what the meaning of the sentence is. Okay, so that's why we talk about modularity. It's mostly to say, yeah, from a pragmatic standpoint, it really doesn't work. Okay, now has this helped, or have I made things worse? Hey, you gotta unmute yourselves if you're gonna say something.
I'll say anything you say on any of this is helpful.
Yeah.
I don't know that I picked up that the remaining of the chapter was, I mean, I should have, but you know, I'm still new to all of this, but that a lot that followed was basically, is refuting a good word, refuting modularity?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, so just that kind of, you know, explanation for me is very helpful. Kind of puts things in perspective because it is complicated for me.
It's complicated for everybody, Jennifer. Let me tell you that much is, I promise you, you're not the only one that says, "Oh,
no, yeah, no, I know.
In fact,
I know, I appreciate that.
Let me rat on my co-author.
Okay.
Lucy was like, "Are you insane? Take that out. It's too complicated." And I was like, "No, we need it." So, you know, you're not the only one there that says, "Boy, this is complicated." Yes, it is.
Well, I think you distilled the theory, is what I understand, to what we're just going to need to understand its applications to second language. So, and in the past, it may not have been so distilled. So if that's what we're doing here, I appreciate that, even though what we're complicated. But
that's exactly the plan, and hopefully it works.
Yeah.
All right. Yes. Turn it up. Yes. Yes, if I can find the button. Yes. Okay. Somebody say something, please.
Dr. Turtle, could you explain to me the differences here, module and modularity? Is there any difference between module and modularity?
Yes, there is a slight difference. A module is the individual unit that's encapsulated, right? So for example, in human cognition, we're going to have a vision module, we're going to have a memory module, we're going to have a speech module, we're going to have a many emotional modules we're going to have, you know, I mean, like for example, you probably have heard that we have, and now I can't remember it, give me a second because it's going to come back to me, the amygdala that has the very basic emotions like fear, right? And then you have higher order emotions like, I don't know, romantic love or envy, you know, those things that require a higher level of, you know, whereas in the amygdala is really the emotions like fear, rage, you know, basically my personality. That's I live entirely in my amygdala. That's what I do. Surprisingly, much of linguistics is done in the. You know, okay, so each one of those is a module. Okay? Now, modularity is the philosophical view that cognition is organized in modules.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes, thank you so much.
Good.
Okay, I have a question. So according to what you had said, or how I understood is you said that the argument is linguistics modular or not?
Correct.
Right?
Modular or not. Yeah.
Okay, and then you said with the language faculty with humans is immodule, right?
Would be one module. Then you could have sub-modules within the module. Yeah. So you could have, for example, syntax be a module, and phonology be another module, and then semantics be a separate module, right? So, but then all of these together would be a module within cognition.
Okay, and so at this point, linguistics is considered modular.
Well, okay, so linguistics is the science, okay? So linguistics is what we're doing right now, and obviously that's non-modular, right? It's you know.
Okay.
Language is a module, right? I mean, that's the question, right? Is language a module? Well, that's where there is the discussion. Some people say yes, it is, and then other people, for example, the cognitive linguists say no, it's not at all, not even a bit. Okay, but if you ask like the formal syntacticians, formal semanticists, they would say yes, of course it's a module.
Okay, thank you.
Good. All right. Any more on modularity? No? All right, okay, so then are we happy with modularity here? Yes, okay. All right, so then the next question was on relevance theory. And you know, when we talk about complicated, relevance theory is that. You know, and to be honest with you, let me be very clear. I mean, that's the point of doing these classes like this. I don't particularly like relevance theory for all sorts of reasons. I mean, I have had lunch with Deirdre Wilson, delightful person. I would like take her to dinner and any other time that I have a chance. I've never met in person Dan Sperber, but I'm sure he's a delightful person and I would love to have lunch with him as well. So it's not that I don't like them personally, okay? Some of my best friends are relevance theorists, okay? So you know the expression, right? So it's true. Having said all of this, I just don't like some aspects of relevance theory. It just hits me, it just rubs me the wrong way, okay? So all of this to say, what you're getting from me is not an impartial view, okay? It's a partial view. It's a passionate view where I have an opinion and I'm sharing it with you. So first of all, the question would be a logical question, which is, I think, what Reza was asking is, why are we doing relevance theory? Why are we bothering with relevance theory, right? I mean, we've got a perfectly fine Gricean, Neo-Gricean pragmatics. Why relevance theory? Okay, now maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but it's a good question, regardless of whether it's a question that Reza thought of or not. It's a good question. So there is no escaping that relevance theory is by far the most successful pragmatic theory today. Okay, and I dare say that it's hard to open a book, a collection of essays, or go to a conference, or read a journal in which there's not going to be at least one reference to relevance theory. Okay, so I would have been doing a disservice to you if we hadn't talked about relevance theory. Okay, because you literally, you cannot throw a stone at a pragmatic conference without hitting relevance theory. Okay. And I throw stones all the time, hoping to hit the object. I don't do that. So that's why. Okay, so you need to start from this idea is that relevance theory has been the most successful of the pragmatic theories. Far more successful than any of the Neo-Gricean approaches, Levinson, Horn, anything. So we need to deal with it no matter whether we like it or we don't like it, okay? And in my mind, it's unfortunate because relevance theory, their positions are, okay, trying to be as objective as I possibly can, less adequate to deal with the interactionist and social approaches that most of the rest of the book will develop. And as you will see, as you read through the chapters, you will understand what I mean by interactionist and sorry, I'm tired. My brain isn't firing on all four cylinders. What did I just say after interactionist? Social, thank you. The social approaches. And in fact, their approach tends to be much closer to formal semantics. And like, for example, they still advocate using model theoretic semantics as their semantic analysis, which is just not going to work. Okay, so that's why I struggle with this. But again, as I said, they are central, and so you cannot talk yourself out of dealing with relevance theory.
Can you briefly go over relevance?
Well, that's what I'm about to do next. I'm explaining why we're doing this. That is because the general feeling is, God, why me? You know, why do we have to do this to ourselves? Well, that's what I'm saying. We have to, because it's everybody, you know, deals with it, and so you can't avoid it. So relevance theory starts from originally, even though they downplay it, and that's one of the things that annoys me, starts originally from Grice, okay? And it says, Grice has 4 maxims, right? One of them is the maxim of relevance. And relevance theory says, well, that's really the crucial thing. Everything else you don't really need, so we can get rid of the other maxims, and all we really need is this assumption of relevance. But we're not going to say that relevance is a maxim that can be violated, flouted, and so on and so forth. We're going to say that it's a principle and that it's always active. Okay, that is that you're always necessarily going to be relevant in what you say. Okay, you cannot, it's unconturnable, the principle of relevance. Okay, so they turn relevance from a maxim that can be flouted into a principle that's always active, that's necessarily always active. Okay, and they do something, and that's very, very clever, and I give them full, you know, props for this. They define, so Grice never really defined what relevance was. He just said you have to be, you know, relevant to what, you know, to what is going on. You know, speak to the point. That's the way he puts it. So he never really says what is relevance. Whereas relevance theory actually provides a definition, and it provides a definition that's wickedly clever. And they say the relevance of a particular utterance is going to be a function of the effort that it takes you to figure out the implications of what you said and of the number of implications that you figure out. Okay? So in other words, if you have a lot of implications and lots of effort, that's okay. If you have a lot of implications and very little effort, that's fantastic. If you have very few implications and a lot of effort, that's bad. Right? And so then they say relevance is calculated by this sort of weighting of the effort that it takes to figure things out and the amount of things that you think, that you find out, that you figure out, and how important they are to you. Okay, so let me give you an example, because so far it's very abstract. Let me give you an example. Let's say that Reza and I are walking down the street, and I push him and I say, car. Okay, and then a car zooms by, and you know, luckily Reza is not hit by the car. Right? So he had to make a lot of effort to figure out what I meant, because I gave him no syntax, no explanation at all. I just said car, right? That's as little help communicatively as can be, right? I mean, the only less communicative way to say this would have been to just push him, right? Not say anything, just grab him and grab him out of the way of the incoming car, right? So it's not very helpful, right? To just shout car, right? However, how relevant is it to still be alive? Yeah, that's pretty relevant, right? And Reza says, yeah, it's pretty relevant, right? So in other words, it was worth it, right? It was worth to have to process this complex implicature, figuring out that, you know, what I meant by car was get out of the way because there's a car that's coming that's about to hit you, right? It was worth figuring it out. Hence, my utterance of car was optimally relevant. Okay? That is, you want to be optimally relevant. It has to be just the correct ratio of effort and, you know, good that comes out of it. You know, the advantage to you of knowing this information. Okay?
So who determines if it's,
Who determines it?
yeah,
Yes, well, you. Okay, let me give you another example. Now I'm going to give an example where I'm not being very relevant, okay? And I'm going to say, Paige, the door is closed. Is it true?
Yes.
Yes. Very good. So I was truthful. Grice would say you get points because you were truthful, right? Is it clear? Was it clear? Absolutely, yes. Doesn't get any clearer than that, right? There's only one door in the near vicinity, so clarity, another point for Grice. So that was manner, right? So it was truthful, that's quality. Did I give you enough information to determine whether the sentence was true or false? Yes, right? I gave you all the information that you needed. 3 points from Grice. Was it relevant?
But we don't know why did you say that?
Right. It's not relevant.
It's not relevant.
Right? Why did I say that? I don't know. Right? How does it matter to you that the door is open or closed? Why would you care?
Currently, my back is to the door, so it would be relevant if there were a fire.
All right. So good.
Physical state of
okay,
being.
you should probably go study relevance theory because that's the kind of shit that they say. So forgive my French. That's the kind of stuff that they say, which drives you bananas. But okay, so no, that's very good. No. It's a very good example. So let's work through it. Yes, if there were a fire, or
Or if she says there is a fire, for example, she gives the context. She talks about it. And then
yeah, okay, but that doesn't really make a difference because I'm the one that said the door's closed, right? So given the context that there is no fire, right? But you're saying I am in an alert state because there could be a fire, even though right now there is no fire. We agree on this, right? The context is no fire, no heat, no smoke, right? So there is no fire. And by the way, we don't have a fire. Oops, I thought that's the modem. It's right there, right? So we have a fire alarm. So you can see that we're up to code here. A&M Commerce, we're up to code. There is a fire alarm. So there is no fire in the room, but there could be one, right? There could be an earthquake, there could be a tornado. And indeed, the relevance theory says, and I told you that you really are thinking with relevance theory here. They say every being, every animate being, any animal, has a standing goal of staying alive. Right? Now, how many of you immediately thought of the Bee Gees song "Staying Alive"? Raise your hand. It's okay. It's okay. Wall of shame. Yeah, there you go. So every human, every animal has a standing goal of staying alive, right? So indeed, the door is locked would be relevant on this very remote goal of saying the door being locked, nobody's coming to the door to kill. Right? So, or no fire is coming to the door to burn me, right? And so in this very, 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 very distant possibility, it's a little bit relevant, okay? So the relevance is teeny tiny bit of relevance. The effort of processing, hey, the puppy. Sorry, I got distracted by Jennifer's. Is that a dog?
It's a cat.
Oh, it's a cat. It's a big cat. I thought it was a dog. Hi, Liliana, how are you?
That's Clark, yeah.
Liliana joined us. Hi, Liliana, can you say hi? Do you have a microphone?
Hello?
Yes, hi.
Hi, sorry, I just got audio.
Yeah, good.
I'm Liliana, by the way.
Yes, hi.
Hey, nice to meet you.
All right, so we're finishing to talk about relevance theory. We started talking about relevance theory, and now we're lost in the wilderness of relevance theory. So when I said, the example was, I say the door is closed, it's not very relevant, okay? So it fails to be optimally relevant because it doesn't give enough information, enough valuable information to be worth processing. Okay, that is, in order to understand the door is locked, your brain has to think, blah, 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 and you don't get enough, bang for your buck, so to speak. Too much effort, too little reward. The reward is minuscule. It's knowing that should there have been a danger to your person, well, you were behind a fairly sturdy locked door, so nobody could get to you. Now, on the other hand, suppose that we were like, I don't know, now I've got to come up with an example where the locked door is really important. Well, suppose that we were like escaping prison, right? And, we're like, the four of us are escaping prison. We come here, the freedom is outside. Oh, the door is locked. Now, that's really super important. We're really disappointed, so super relevant. Okay? So then the context is going to tell you, change in this. Oh, very good.
Is it relevant?
So if in the case that we're trying to escape the prison, yes, it's super relevant, because now the door is locked means our escape plan failed.
Is it relevant because you are the listener, or is it relevant because the environment impacts you, who is trying to escape?
The environment. It's relevant because the environment then makes it relevant to the context, and we want the door to be open so that we can run away, and because it's locked, we can't. Right? So now, knowing that the door is locked is super important. Okay. All right. So then, yes, go ahead.
Context changes the value of the relevance.
Correct. Yes. Okay. Yes. So relevance theory came up with this definition of relevance as I said, a function of effort and informativeness. Okay, that is super clever. And also original, okay? And they introduce this idea of optimal relevance. So then they say, when you talk, you're not trying to be cooperative, you're not trying to be truthful, clear, and so on and so forth, the Gricean maxims, you're trying to maximize relevance, okay? That is to be optimally relevant, okay? Maximize relevance, optimal relevance.
And this theory is saying, supposing that, or proposing that that's the only thing that's important.
Correct. Yes. No, actually, no. It's not. They're not saying it's the only thing that's important. They're saying it's the only thing that we pay attention to as people. Okay. Other things can be important. Okay, but we just don't care. Okay, because they're all subsumed under the big flag of optimal relevance. Okay. And you can make a case for it, for example, for clarity. Okay, so suppose that I said, Reza, it appears that a vehicle propelled by the burning of fossil fuel is approaching at a speed such that it might endanger your, and then you got hit by, right. So you might argue that in this case, it wasn't optimally relevant because the quality of the presentation, the style that I presented it with, was inappropriate, right? It didn't. So, but then clarity is subsumed under relevance, right? That is, in order to be optimally relevant, you have to be clear, because then the processing requirement of the complicated sentence is way too high, and in fact it ends up being, it gets in the way of the purpose of saying, there's a car coming to begin with, right? So then, the argument that relevance theory would make is, well, clarity, quantity, they're all subsumed under optimal relevance, okay? Including truth, quality. Okay, this is the argument that relevance theory makes. Now, that's where I part company with relevance theory. I just can't take that. Okay, to my mind, and I discussed this in the book briefly. They say, sentences come with the assumption of truthfulness, so you don't need to specify it in relevance. I just don't buy it. Okay, sorry, it just doesn't convince me. But they would argue that truth is part of other aspects of communication, not of language, but of other things. I don't know what they say. As I said, I'm not convinced by that argument. But their point is that you don't need 4 maxims, etc. All you need is this principle of relevance. Okay. So far, so good, right? I mean, you know, they certainly did one thing very, very well, and that's redefining relevance. Okay, that you cannot, or at least I cannot disagree with that. Okay, maybe you disagree with that. And then the other thing that they did, which was also very, very good, is they went into the whole discussion of explicatures. And so basically they pointed out that the meaning of a sentence, right? So if I say, Mary's sitting, okay, if I say, well, so I say, have you eaten yet, right? And you say yes or no, right? And depending on whether you've had dinner or not. But literally, when I say, have you eaten, it could be like, of course you should have to say yes, because you're alive, right? So you must have eaten sometime in your life, right? Now, however, that was never said in the sentence, right? But in order to figure out the truth value of have you eaten, yes, no, you have to first restrict it to tonight.
See, because my mind immediately went to, have you eaten today?
Well, or today, that's fine, right? But so either tonight or today, or you know, if you've been, you know, fasting from one of those intermittent fasting, because I'm trendy. If you've been fasting intermittently this week, right, or something like that. In my case, in the past 12 minutes, you know, but that's a different story. You know, so you know, so the fact that you have to restrict it to today or tonight or whatever, that is an explicature. Okay, so it's not an implicature in the Gricean sense, that where you're calculating a new meaning. Is that in order to understand the literal meaning of the sentence, you need to figure out some explicatures to get to the meaning of the sentence, right? So this was not just relevance theory. There were other scholars involved in this, Ken Back and Fauconnier and you know, a few other people. Even I wrote a little piece on that in 1999. But, so my point is, there was a big debate that was started by relevance theory. Then other people kicked in as well, but it started with relevance theory. So that was another thing that they did that was super important. You know, so because of this in and of itself, you know, as I was saying before, you can't ignore relevance theory. You cannot say, well, it's complicated, we're just not going to deal with it. Okay, I mean, you know, much like we don't talk about discourse representation theory because it's very complicated, and quite frankly, there's like 5 people that do it. You know, so if you're really interested, you know, go ahead and study it on your own. You know, let me know what it means. You know, it's wickedly complicated. But so my point is that relevance theory, you can't avoid it. It's really out there. So that's in a very small nutshell, right? What relevance theory is about. Okay. Well, that's what I don't think I want to go any further with that. Any other questions? Anybody wants to ask anything else about relevance theory? No. All right. Okay. Very good. So then that those were the 2 questions that had been asked in class, and I said that I was going to answer them. So are there any questions now live? Don't be shy. And remember, yes.
Okay, so on page 18 in chapter 1.
And I don't have the chapter printed out, so this is going to be interesting. Do I remember what I wrote? So what do I say on page 18?
So this is the discussion about the semiotics.
Yes.
Signifier and
Good.
And then
pictures. I like pictures.
Yeah. So the explanation is that the mental representation, that the thought is the meaning of the word cat.
Yes.
Okay. So my question is, does the thought have to be universal? Meaning, does everybody have to come up with the same picture of a cat?
Okay, good. All right, so the question is, when we say that the meaning of the word cat is the mental image that that the speakers have of cat, is it a universal image? That is, does everybody have the same image in their head, or everybody has their own image, and then, you know, that's that, right? Okay, so that's actually a very good question, and it's a deep philosophical question. We like this question. I like this question. It's all about me in the end. I hope you figured that out. Okay, fine. So I like this question. And so two things. So first of all, let's start with the distinction. When we say mental image, we don't mean a visual image. Okay? So I don't mean a picture of a cat. It's represented as a picture in the book because I couldn't put an actual cat live in between two covers. It's very difficult. I tried to put them, but it didn't work. My cats are very sort of independent. So what we mean is the thoughts that one has about cats. Somebody, and I don't remember who it was, asked, what about a blind person that has never seen, like a born blind person that has never seen a cat? Well, they have thoughts about cats. They may have felt one, they may have heard about cats in a book, you know, whatever, right? So they have thoughts. So when we say mental image, what we really mean is thoughts, not visual images. Okay? Now, some of your thoughts can be visual images, and that's fine, okay? But not necessarily all of your thoughts are visual images. We don't think in visual images, okay? We think in thoughts. I mean, that's quite clear, okay? So then the question, to rephrase the question slightly more technically, is, are the mental representations of people of a given sign all the same? Okay, in other words, are they shared in the entire language community, or are they individual? Okay, and here the answer is beautiful and sophisticated, and so it's probably going to take a second to percolate, because it turns out that the answer had already been provided by Durkheim, who is a sociologist, French sociologist, one of the founders of sociology, who basically says there are social facts. Okay, so if I look sort of down the street, I see a cat, right? And that's a fact, okay? And that's a private fact between me and the cat, right? I pet the cat says meow, and you know, that's the end of the story, right? It's an event between me and the cat. But then, and that's not very important, that's not that significant, okay? But as a society, as a group of people, we make things happen as a society in which there figure thoughts about cats, okay? Such as, for example, when I say, is that a cat? You know, a minute ago, I look at the screen and I say, is that a dog or is that a cat? Okay, and we all look at the picture and say, oh no, that's a cat, or that's a big cat, right? So something happened there that was a social exchange that involved our collectively thinking about cats. Okay, now the sum total of these social exchanges is the meaning of cat. It's a social fact, it's not an individual mental fact. Okay, and in this sense, Saussure, who was influenced by Durkheim, and Durkheim say, language exists fully only in the totality of the social exchanges. Okay, language exists only in the society at large, in the group at large. Okay, so each individual only has a small and limited part of language with a capital L. Okay, So it's a little bit philosophical. It's a little bit complicated. I fully acknowledge it, but it's beautiful. It's clever. You gotta give me that. Come on. You know. So does that answer your question?
Can I ask a question
Yes.
to add on to that? So
Sure.
I know that after that it was discussed about the culture aspect of it and the miscommunications. Would that be part of that, where it's that each different culture might have a different social perception? For example, a cat in one country might be veneered, whereas in another country it might just be a pet. So it's not the same
And
view of it.
in some countries we eat them.
Right.
No, I'm serious.
So
In Italy, they used to do that. In fact, the Germans made fun of the Italians, calling them cat eaters.
Interesting.
I've never
Yeah.
had a cat, I promise you, but I know people who have.
But
And
it's so that would
you know
play
what?
into
It
it.
tastes like chicken. Sorry. Couldn't resist.
Okay.
Right, sorry, you were asking a serious question, please.
No, well, I guess it's just to go with that. It would, so that's where the miscommunications would be, because if you have a certain like a certain mental thought about a cat, whereas I have a different one.
Yes.
And I mean, is that where that would arise, like miscommunication?
That's one of the places where it can arise. Absolutely. That's definitely the case, because you have one culture will have a certain representation,
Mm-hmm.
a certain idea, right? And then another culture will have a different one. And if the two ideas conflict for whatever reason, right? There's some reason why, you know, well, okay, so here's a good example. I come from Italy, right? And, you know, we have a certain reverence for food and eating together as a sign of family. You know, it's the moment that the family comes together and so on. My daughter, raised in this country, more American than apple pie, as I say to her, which annoys the crap out of her, but that's why I said it. But she's really sort of real American. If I say, let's have dinner, my daughter says, sure, goes to the refrigerator, grabs a piece of bread, puts some peanut butter on it, and walks away. And I'm like, what are you doing? You know, that's not a meal, right? And, you know,
yeah.
So there you see, you could have a miscommunication, right? Because, I mean, you know, obviously my daughter knows enough now, she's 25, so she knows that when her father says, let's have a meal, she sits down and says, it's going to be 3 hours.
Talk.
You know, but
yeah.
You know, one of her friends say, you know, I could say, oh, come over, we'll have some dinner. They'd come over, open the fridge, and start eating raw celery, and then I beat them on the head with the raw celery, right? You know, because to me that's not a meal.
Right.
Okay. So yeah, that would be an example of how you could have a miscommunication based on the meaning of a word such as meal or dinner.
Right. Or maybe even like an idiom. Maybe that's where like, because certain words have a certain context at like in a certain phrase, right? Okay.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, basically, when you have two different groups that are different culturally, they're going to have different ways of seeing the world that may overlap to some extent. Like, for example, all of us, and we come from different cultures, etc., we're all wearing clothes, right? Because our cultures overlap with this idea that you cannot walk around naked, okay?
Right.
Conversely, children are like, yeah, and, you know, they take off their clothes, run around naked. As a father, I spent the first 2 years of my daughter's life putting clothes on her because she was like, you know, you know, so clearly, right, it's a cultural thing, right? It's not natural, because naturally speaking, children, you know, they wouldn't wear any clothes if you let them, right?
Right.
And we have to, you know, instill in them that you have to wear clothes, right? So then all of our cultures agree on this, but if, you know, we were like connected with somebody in the Amazon jungle, you know, they might be walking around without clothes or with like, you know, minimal clothing because, well, you're in the Amazon jungle, it's hot. You know, why do you need clothes? You know, I'm wearing like 3 layers of clothing, You know, in the Amazon, I wouldn't need it, right? And then, you know, and if I were broadcasting this from Antarctica, I'd probably be wearing even more clothing, right? So there are cultural differences, but there is an overlap, right? I mean, you know, and that's why, you know, humans usually, there is some overlap and we can communicate to some extent.
Thank you.
Yes. What you have just talked about is about stereotype.
No, not necessarily stereotypes. I mean, it's, I mean, or depending on how you define a stereotype. I mean, because, you know, a stereotype is just a belief about something, right? I mean, it can be a false belief or a true belief, but it's a belief, right? So, you know, I used to say, well, it's not a stereotype if it's true. You know, if you go to Italy and say, let's have pasta, you know, we're going to say, yeah, good idea, let's have pasta, right? And that's a stereotype, but it's also true, you know? Whereas if you go to China, nobody eats rice. And I was like, what? It was one of the great moments in my life. Now, you can get rice, but you have to order it separately. No, we're in China, it's nothing. Anyway. So those are stereotypes, right? You know, but then also, you know, the fact that, you know, we have pets in our houses, right? Well, that's a stereotype, right? I mean, there's cultures where they don't do that, right? You know, so the boundary between stereotype and fact is weak. Yeah.
Sorry, Dr. Schroeder.
Yes.
So when you say, for example, dinner, you have a conception that is totally different with your daughter. That is because the mental concept is different, or no, because the formal.
Yeah, that is, you know, obviously my daughter and I have a different mental representation of dinner.
So you have the same signifier, but the signifier is different.
Correct, yes, yes. But overlapping.
Overlap.
Okay, because I mean, in both of our cases, it involves the ingestion of food. Okay, yeah. Then what we disagree on is that for me, it involves the ingestion of food while seated at a table using utensils, you know? Whereas for her, it's like, well, basically, you know, like wild animals gnawing at a random piece of food that you got in the refrigerator, right? So, you know, they're slightly different things. But I mean, the overlap is massive, okay? That's one thing, by the way. If you get nothing else out of this course, it's a really important thing. Cultural differences are minuscule compared to the amount that we share with every other culture. We make a lot of them, but in fact, we agree for like 99%, and then we disagree on that teeny tiny sliver of 1%. You know, I mean, you know, again, think of the dinner between me and my daughter. We agree that it's food. We agree that you know, you don't eat dinner all the time. We agree that you know, that it involves other people. You know, all of these things we agree. The only thing that we disagree on is the amount of time that you spend seated together or not, right? So in fact, we disagree on a very small part of the definition. Most of the definition we agree. You know, and this is generally the case. You know, we make a lot of the differences between ourselves and between cultures, but in fact, the similarities are much bigger. That got deep real fast there for a second, eh?
What about
Yes.
What about when the words are, I hope this is not too tangential, but what about when the word is sort of a colloquial term, and while it inflicts the same mental image, people might disagree with it?
Yeah, that's a very good
like
point.
Supper, for instance, comes to mind. Like supper's not widely used, but most people understand that it is going to be a meal, right? But they may disagree that it's
right. And you know what? We're gonna talk about that in painful detail
Okay.
I'll make you regret asking that question when we see. I've already pre-written this. Is when we get to chapter 10, and we're going to talk about enregisterment, and the whole idea that registers and context and words carry connotations indexically. So there's an indexicality to each term and each level of formality, and that index indexes the speaker as well as the thing and the situation.
Okay.
So that if you say supper as opposed to grab a bite,
right,
the differences in style define who you are and define what the activity that you're doing is.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? So,
I think
it's actually a very deep question that you have there. And it's one of the topics in the most advanced cutting edge sociolinguistics / pragmatic stuff that we're going to see in chapter 10.
Okay.
Fun times.
I hope so.
No, it is fun, I can tell you. But it gets a little philosophical there and then. But I love this stuff, so. All right, other questions, anyone?
Well, I had a question about the intrinsic value versus arbitrary.
Okay.
And where money is arbitrary because there's no intrinsic value attached to it.
Yes.
But gold and a car were your examples to be used for intrinsic
That things
value.
are intrinsically valuable. Yeah. Okay, so what's the question?
So is the car or the gold intrinsically valuable because we stipulate that it is?
No. Okay, good. So I'm glad you asked the question. So if we stipulate something, it's no longer intrinsic by definition. Okay. Intrinsic means that it's valuable regardless of whoever is there or not. Okay. So why is a car intrinsically valuable? Well, a car is intrinsically valuable because you can go somewhere really fast, very comfortably, right? So let's say that, you know, we took a car and we sent it back 500 years in the past. I don't know why we would do that, but let's say we did. So nobody's around to say, oh, that's a car. They would say, oh, something weird just appeared in the middle of the town square, okay? But then somehow they figured out how to use it. It would be valuable to these people. And they had gasoline, let's assume for a minute now, okay? With large tanks of gasoline attached, right?
So then,
so that's intrinsically valuable because you can go somewhere really fast, regardless of what you think about cars, your opinion of cars, anything.
So,
right?
You know, we had Armageddon or whatever, and the car still carries the value
right.
because
It's intrinsically valuable because anybody that wants to go somewhere can go somewhere with the car.
Okay.
Gold is intrinsically valuable because you can exchange it, again, anywhere you go for other things, right? So it's intrinsically valuable. Water is intrinsically valuable because you can drink it, right? And it's good. Food is intrinsically valuable because you can eat it, okay? Now, money is not intrinsically valuable because it's paper. It's valuable because we agreed that we're going to exchange money for goods, and then there is the government with big guns that says you must exchange money for goods, okay? If somebody comes into my store and says, I would like to buy, you know, a copy of your book, Dr. Attardo, here's, you know, $50, and I say, sorry, no, I only take goats in payment, because we're in Texas, we raise goats. You know, I only take goats, I'll get arrested. You can't do that.
Seriously?
Yes, you cannot do that. You cannot refuse tender.
Oh, you can't refuse it.
Right.
Oh, okay.
You know, so you cannot say I only take goats in my shop. You cannot say that because the U.S. government says that you must, if you are, you know, selling, you must accept dollars in payment. You cannot refuse to accept dollars in payment.
Okay.
But you may not, you know, you can say I'll give you a discount if you pay me in goats. Then fine, right?
Gotcha.
You know, I can say, well, it's $50 or a goat. right? You know, so then that's fine, okay? But you cannot say, I don't take US dollars. Okay, you get into horrible trouble with the government.
What about foreign money then?
Well, foreign money is, you know, we're not in the foreign country.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if somebody gave you Canadian money, would you?
Well, you can't use it in this country. You have to go to the bank and exchange it.
Okay.
Right.
But if all they had was Canadian, you could refuse.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Nobody can make you take money from another government.
Mhm.
I mean, except if you're in Canada.
Right, well, yeah.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. That is, each government, you know, it's called fiat money because, not because it's printed in Italy by fiat. No. It's called fiat money because fiat means by you know, it's let it be this way. You know, make it so. If God had been Captain Picard, he would have said, make it so in the Bible. Instead it says fiat.
Okay.
You know, it's the fiat lux, you know, let there be light. Right? It's the first word of the Bible in the Roman Vulgate. You know, so it's called fiat money because it is by will, the will of the people, you know, the government, whatever, right? So, but money per se is just a piece of paper. Very good paper, by the way. It's very high in cotton, and it's high quality paper. You know, really, really good. Good. You can wash it. People don't know that, but you can actually wash your money, and then you can iron it. I'm just saying you could. I'm not recommending it. I'm just saying you could. Don't try to wash your newspaper. It's not going to take it well. And then you say you don't learn anything useful from this class. All right. So does that clarify? Yeah. All right. Other questions, anyone?
Sorry, I just need some explanation about proposition. Just I want to make sure I know.
Yeah. So what? What specific?
About the word proposition, the meaning of the proposition when we talk about it. What do we mean exactly?
Okay, the meaning of the word proposition. Okay, so in logic.
This is what I think is that every sentence has a meaning is that cannot be changed. Yes, and in different contexts it is the same. Is that the proposition or no? Just that.
All right. Okay. So what is the meaning of proposition? Okay, it's a good question because it's complicated. But it's not an unchanging meaning. That's not the way to look at it. Okay. So first of all, we need to be very clear that proposition, like presupposition and so on, are logical terms. Okay, they come from logic. Okay, and logic defines things differently than linguistics does. Okay, so you need to be very careful when you're using those terms. You know, is that they're used the logical way, right? They're defined the logical way. Right. So what logic says is that every sentence, right, consists of basically a proposition, that it conveys a proposition. Okay. So what that proposition is basically the meaning of the sentence. Okay. Now, and by meaning of the sentence, the generally accepted definition is what it would take for that sentence to be either true or false in context. Okay. So in other words, is what it would take for you to know about the world in order to determine whether that sentence is true or false, right? So that if I say, the coffee is in the cup, right? What do you need to know to determine the truth or falsehood of this sentence?
Is there coffee in there?
If there is coffee in there, very good. Now, notice that, is the coffee liquid and so on and so forth. But that's true, but logicians don't think that way. They're not interested. Logicians think exactly like Jennifer said. Is there coffee in the cup, yes or no? If it is true, then it's true. And if it's not true, then it isn't true. It's a tautology. It's just repeating the same thing. So a logician would say that the sentence, the coffee is in the cup, is true if and only if there is coffee in the cup. what coffee is and what the cup is, and how are you going to determine the presence of the coffee in the cup? By opening it and checking, presumably. We don't care. That's none of the logician's business. The logician says, if there is coffee in the cup, then the sentence is true. If there isn't, then the sentence is false. Okay? So the proposition, which we indicate by P, is coffee in the cup. Right? So then you can modify the proposition by saying, for example, I believe that there is coffee in the cup. Right? So now what you're really uttering is a big proposition that says, I have a certain belief, and that belief is proposition Q. There is coffee in the cup. So then the truth of the coffee in the cup is now irrelevant. The truth of, do I believe that there is coffee in the cup, is now the relevant part. Okay? So in that sense, invariance works, right? Because the meaning of the sentence is not really relevant. It's the truth value of the sentence that's relevant for logic.
So if we ask a question, we can say it doesn't have a value of truth or false. For example, I say, is there coffee in that cup?
Right, because it's a question, it's either true or false. Right, I mean, that's the whole speech act theory, is that, you know, then when you ask a question, you're no longer performing a speech act of assertion, which can be true or false, but you're performing a speech act of asking a question, which can be felicitous or non-felicitous. So if I said, is there coffee in the cup? And I fully know that there isn't coffee because I drank it all. It's a non-felicitous question because you don't ask questions for which you know the answer, right? I mean, actually you do. They're called pedagogical questions, and if you're a teacher, you do that all the time, right? But you can only do that in a classroom.
Attorneys do it also.
Yeah, attorneys do it. That's exactly right. But only in court. You know, if you're married to an attorney and the attorney says,
a nightmare.
Did you or did you not make dinner tonight? Say, you idiot, you're eating the dinner. Of course I made it. You know, that's how divorce is, the divorce rate, I mean, attorneys is through the roof. No, I'm joking. You know, so you don't ask questions for which you know the answer unless you're in very special situations, right? Because you know, the felicity conditions of questions is that you ask questions if you need to know the answer, if you want to know the answer. That's the felicity condition. Okay? Ari seems disgusted by the definition of felicity condition. See, facial expressions are great.
She was eating something.
I'm just so scared if I'm just not sure if I'm understanding the whole thing. But would you mind explaining the then difference between proposition versus presupposition? Yes, I'm not sure.
Right. No, that's a good question, but it's the kind of question that I need coffee for. So give me 1 second.
By the way, anybody wants coffee? No.
Oh.
Ari, you're not alone. I had a hard time with presupposition too, and the whole negation of I have a
I'm not
too.
the only one. Okay.
Sorry,
No. It's trust me. This is one of the topics that nobody gets. Okay, so don't panic. Don't worry. You know, it's just complicated. There's no 5 ways around it. Okay, but it's actually not super complicated. Okay, so first of all, let's be clear. A proposition is basically a statement. Okay, you know, think of it as a statement of a state of affairs. Okay, so if I say the coffee is in the cup, that's a proposition. Right, so it's just a state of affairs. It's like things are this way in the world. Right, that's it. Okay, that's not complicated, right? That's just a matter of definition. Now, presuppositions, that's more complex, and that's what trips people up, because the problem is that it becomes very confusing, because you get confused with inference and presuppositions, because they're very, very close to each other, but they're slightly different in meaning. Okay, so let's first review what an inference is, and then we'll talk about the presupposition. So an inference is a logical conclusion that follows from a proposition. Okay, so if I say the coffee is in the cup, it follows that it's not milk in the cup, it's not vodka, it's not water, it's not rocks, it's not juice, it's not whatever. Okay, it's not anything else that's not coffee, right? We assume the truth of the proposition. Okay, so it also follows that there is something in the cup, right? Yes. All right. So that's an inference. Okay, I think in the book I said, if I say I am married, it follows that I am not a bachelor. Right? I think that's the example that I used. Yeah. Right. So that's an inference. It follows logically from the sentence. Very good. Now, let's take the negation of the sentence, the coffee is in the cup, which would be the coffee is not in the cup, or there isn't coffee in the cup. Okay? So now, let's take there is coffee in the cup and there is no coffee in the cup. Right? The two sentences together, if I can find an inference that's valid for both sentences, the statement and the negation of the statement, that inference is also a presupposition. Okay? So what would be true of both there is coffee in the cup and there isn't coffee in the cup?
There is a cup.
There is a cup, right? That's true, right? Here's the cup. Whether it has coffee in it or water, it's still the cup, right? It's still there, right? So that's true regardless of whether it's got coffee in it or not. That is a presupposition. Okay? So it's not that crazy complicated.
But so with presupposition, like it wouldn't be another conclusion? Like, for example, I don't know, like there's coffee in the cup, but then there's no coffee in the cup because it's been there so long that now it's turned into goo or something like that?
Oh, no. You're writing a little novel, which is good. And, if you publish it and become very rich, and it's the new Harry Potter, remember us and send us a check. But no, stop.
Okay.
So what we're doing here is we're just comparing a sentence with its negation. We're not building anything around it. We're not saying, well, how come the coffee is no longer in the cup and all of that. All we're saying is you have two sentences. Sentence A is the coffee is in the cup. Sentence B is the negation of sentence A. The coffee is not in the cup. What is true of both of these sentences? You're not actually saying both sentences, etc., etc. Okay?
Can you give me one more example just to really?
Sure. So, for example, I can say, I am wearing a gray sweater, and I am not wearing a gray sweater, right?
Okay.
Yes. Right. So what is true of both I am wearing a gray sweater and I am not wearing a gray sweater? Well, I'm wearing a sweater, right? I mean, not gray or if I were wearing a black sweater, still be true, right? But it wouldn't be gray.
So the presupposition is there is a sweater.
There is a sweater and I'm wearing it.
Okay.
Okay. Now, if there's other thing. I exist. Right? That's another presupposition of I'm wearing a gray sweater, right? If I didn't exist, I couldn't be saying I'm wearing a gray sweater.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
Harry,
When would
Harry
this?
is saying yes. Very good. Excellent.
But I guess when would we use presupposition, or what's like, what is the value in knowing that?
Very good. So let's say that you find yourself at a cocktail party, and you find a very attractive person that you are attracted to, and you say hi, and they say, I'm a logician, and you say, aha, I know presupposition, and they will fall in your arms, and you will live happily forever. That's as far as the usefulness of presupposition is.
Okay.
Liliana, this is philosophy. Usefulness? I mean, please.
No, I guess just to know
Please.
what the application of it. When would we need to apply it, or when would it be a?
God help us. God help us. Hopefully never. You don't want to be dealing with this stuff. Please.
Okay, good.
So to follow up on what Liliana said, I think this is why it was so hard for me reading it, is because I kept thinking, why would I follow up the proposition he's wearing a gray sweater with the proposition he's not wearing a gray sweater? Because obviously
Because you're talking to logicians. Remember, if you know, when you want to see, you lot are way too practical. You're saying, why would somebody waste their time saying he's wearing a gray sweater? He's not wearing a gray sweater. That makes no sense. Of course it doesn't make any sense. This is logic, for God's sake. If we wanted sense, we would have studied engineering, okay? I mean, you know, quite literally, these are concepts that were imported into linguistics wholesale from logic, okay? Now, in logic, they're super important, and they have their uses, which, you know, for logicians, they really matter. From a linguistic standpoint, they really don't, they're not that useful, except that occasionally something revolves around them. Okay, so for example, okay, so this gets a little bit esoteric, but just so that you see that actually sometimes it is useful. When there are misunderstandings among people, a lot of the time the misunderstanding is in the presupposition, not in what they say. You see what I'm saying? So, for example, if I say, you know, Liliana, get me a cup of coffee, it presupposes that I have the right to ask for that. You understand? Right? And so what that presupposes then is that somehow it's okay for me to ask Liliana to bring me coffee. Right? I mean, assuming that we were in the same room, obviously, otherwise it's a bit complicated, okay? But let's assume that we're in the same room, okay? I got carried away. I forgot that we are like in a long distance thing, right? So if I say, Liliana, bring me coffee, right? It presupposes that I am in a position to make that request. It assumes that I am in that position. Okay?
And why is that not an inference? Why would I not be inferring that you have the power to, or the permission to ask her this request?
Well, I mean, remember that a presupposition is a kind of inference. Okay, so presuppositions aren't necessarily different from inferences. They are sort of deeper than inferences. So let's put it this way. If I said, you know, bring me a cup of coffee, you might say, I can't because there is no coffee. Okay, that would be an inference. But to say, who are you to tell me to bring you coffee? Now we're working at the presupposition level. You see, it's deeper.
Okay, because earlier I wrote, not to be like that, I'm trying to understand. Earlier I wrote that it was close to an inference, but it's actually...
No, it is close. I mean, a presupposition is an inference. Okay? But it's an inference that holds not just for one sentence, but also for its negation. Right? So it's kind of like a deeper inference. It's a more sophisticated inference. It's a more restricted inference.
So would you say that inference is more on the surface level, while
Yes.
presupposition is?
Yes.
Okay.
And see, I'm starting to understand it because I was thinking that the presupposition, you had to have the negation. I wasn't thinking of it as it's an assumption that needs to be for both the proposition and the negation.
Yes.
Because now I understand your example about the I'm wearing a gray sweater and I'm not wearing a gray sweater, because having the gray or wearing the gray sweater, that would apply to both the proposition and the negation part of that.
Correct.
I wasn't understanding it like that before.
Yeah,
I thought you had to have the negation.
No, you don't have to have it. You can have it implicit.
Okay.
Is it important?
Okay,
is
I
it important
understand
to? Is it important to ask yourself, if you're trying to think about this, does that proposition resist negation? Is that something?
That's exactly right. The
to understand it?
negation is the test of whether it's a presupposition or just an inference.
And so with your example about asking someone to get a cup of coffee, could you explain that under that resisting negation?
Yes. So again, let's take my example. Sorry, Liliana, you're the example again. If I say, Liliana, please bring me a cup of coffee, or if I say, Liliana, don't bother bringing me a cup of coffee, or I don't need coffee now, I'm good. Both the sentences presuppose that somehow it's okay for me to ask her to get me coffee.
Ask her to get the coffee. I see.
So she would have to be
Okay.
my employee or
Assistant,
something like that, whatever, right? Or I did
There could be
she owes me coffee, something. I mean, there would have to be a reason
Right.
why I felt comfortable assuming that I can tell her whether to go get me coffee or not, right?
Can it have more than one presupposition? There can be more than one, right?
Oh yeah, of course. There's thousands. Yeah.
So this is where
Okay.
cultural difference or cultural conflict comes in, is because a presupposition in one culture is not an acceptable
Yes, absolutely. Yes,
presupposition.
absolutely. Yeah. So you're going to have cultures that have different presuppositions, right? So, for example, one culture will assume that older people are should be respected. In another culture, we say, okay, boomer, right? I mean, it's CIM trend. Each culture. I mean, you could say that a culture is a set of presuppositions. You could say that. It's whatever the culture assumes to be true. I mean, assumes to be, is the background of thoughts, of all thoughts. The background to everything that we think.
So can I ask this, is it important to understand that as a teacher so that you can help understand if misunderstandings are going on, or you're trying to explain or account, and be aware of misunderstandings?
Well, okay, so I have two answers. Okay, the first one is yes, absolutely, yeah. The second one is Jennifer, you're trying too hard.
That's philosophy, and that's what sucks about it. So, it takes you down the rabbit hole.
No, I mean, you're trying too hard to make it useful.
Right, I am.
I mean, there are some things
agree.
you just need to learn because they're part of the field, and most likely you will never get any direct use in the classroom or linguistically speaking. It's just that this is the kind of thing that if you're reading pragmatics, eventually somebody will hit you on the head with a presupposition, and you need to know what happened. Okay.
Got it.
So while I appreciate your strong attempts to make it work,
Make it relevant.
yeah, and maybe that's true. Okay, I'm not saying that it's not necessarily true, but I'm just saying I'm not that convinced that we really need to say for everything, and here's why it's going to be useful in the classroom, because we need to be prepared to admit that some of this isn't going to be useful in the classroom particularly, okay? But you still need to know.
Right.
It's background knowledge, yeah. That's a good way of thinking about it. Background knowledge, But
This-
I mean, so having said this, please ask these questions all the time. Okay,
Sure.
I say that. No, I mean, no, not just you individually. I mean, everybody. Okay, because I mean, that's really one of the things that the students don't do often enough is to say, why does this matter? Why am I being taught this? Okay, and that's super important, because if you understand why we're teaching you this, then you understand what it is that we're teaching. Okay, it's engaging material at a higher level.
It's also helpful for me to hear you say, understand it up to a point, but don't go down that rabbit hole with it. It's okay. It's
And you can go down the rabbit hole, and if you want to, I can give you some
No,
books.
no,
and
I don't. No.
That's exactly the reaction that you need to have. Very good. I'm proud of you.
Dr. Tardo, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So then my question is a general question. Why are we studying pragmatics? Why is it important?
Okay. Well, that question, so now, you're going to say like, well, Sal talks like every side of his mouth. There I'm going to say, because without pragmatics, you would fail horribly in the classroom. Okay, so I know it's like I just said, well, not everything applies to the classroom, but I mean, the reason why we do pragmatics is, quite literally, because if we didn't do pragmatics, we would be horrible teachers, and our students would hit us with chairs, or other objects that they happen to have in the classroom. I don't know, chairs, desks, much more painful. Pencils, yeah. Laptops. No, that's very expensive.
Well, it's Texas. They're for sure.
It is Texas. That's true. Boots.
So it doesn't matter what age the student is. So for instance, it would be helpful in an elementary class.
Oh,
as well as
yes,
a college class.
In fact, that's a whole field that we didn't really touch upon. There's developmental pragmatics, where you're looking at how children acquire pragmatics, and it's different. So you don't get all of pragmatics, acquired in the same, in one day. It takes years to develop. We mentioned it very, very briefly, I think in passing somewhere, because I remember digging up references about irony acquisition for Lucy when she was writing that chapter. So we do talk about it, but not very much. But yeah, no. So especially if we're talking about developmental. So when you have children under, like 10, for example, they don't understand all sorts of pragmatic things. So if you use these pragmatic things with the children, they have no idea what you're talking about. Okay, so irony is a good example. Children will understand very simple irony, maybe as early as 7 or 8, but complicated irony, they don't get until they're 12 or 13. So if you go to a kid and you say, well, that was smart, meaning to say that was stupid, they'll go home and say, the teacher said I'm smart. And, you'd be like, I failed horribly, right? So yeah, no, there is, it's super important to understand, how the context and the situation in which we say something affects the meaning of that something. Super, super important. And because of this, and when you're teaching, you're communicating, and if you don't understand this as a teacher, you're gonna like hit the wall in spectacular ways. So if you say, why do we study pragmatics? For your own good, because if you didn't know pragmatics, you would be making horrible, horrible mistakes. Okay, I'll just give you an example, and this is a tragically true story. When I started teaching in this country, and we're talking like over 30 years ago, they threw me in a freshman composition classroom, and they said, go teach. And I'd never been in a freshman comp classroom because we didn't have that in Italy, so I had no idea even what I was supposed to be teaching them. So I go there and they say, well, on the first day, just introduce yourself to your students. So I decide that what we're going to do is that everybody's going to hand me their ID, and then I'm going to call them and give them back the ID, and then they introduce themselves to the classroom. Okay? This was the thought. So I do that, and everybody gives me their ID, and then I say, you know, Mary, you know. So Mary comes, and I say, oh, you don't look like your picture at all. Not a good thing to say in America to anyone, particularly not a woman. You know, it was like, you know, so that's why we teach you pragmatics, because lesson number 1 is do not comment on the look of anybody unless it's to say, you look great. And by the way, you all look great. You know, so that's pragmatics, because in Italy, that would have been a perfectly fine remark. Nobody would have flinched. You know, in this country, turns out not so good a point, as I found out. All right, other questions?
Sorry, I've got one question, but this is not my question, but because I couldn't answer the question, it is for Rayani.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it asks about negation in presupposition and proposition. So.
Well, that's what we talked about before, the resistance to negation.
Exactly, yeah. So just now I need 1 or 2 examples so I can kind of get it. I know now what it is, yes. Yeah. But I'm looking for an example. It's when we change it into the negative, what happens?
Well, that's like I said before. You know, I'm wearing a gray sweater, or I'm not.
I'm not wearing.
Right.
Yeah. So you mean then the proposition changes?
No, the proposition is the same. Okay, the proposition P is I'm wearing a gray sweater.
Yeah.
Non-P is I'm not wearing a gray sweater, right? So the proposition is the same, except it's negated. Okay, the proposition is the same, it's now negated.
So when it is negative, preposition so changes.
No, the proposition is the same. It's now negated, okay? So you would have P, I wear a gray sweater, right? And non-P, I don't wear a gray sweater.
Yes.
Okay, so it's the same proposition, except it's negated. Then from these 2 sentences together, you get presuppositions.
Got it. So what happens to that presupposition? Is it the same again for 2 negative sentences? Or no, for each one we have a presupposition.
No, all right, no. We're confusing things here. So let's label the sentence. We have sentence A is, I am wearing a gray sweater. Sentence B is, I am not wearing a gray sweater.
Yes.
Sentence A and B express the same proposition, which is, we label P.
Yes.
Okay? Except that sentence B is non-P. So sentence A is P. Sentence B is non-P. Okay? In logic, you would write it with a tilde or a little caret that says no.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Non-P. So P and non-P taken together determine a set of presuppositions that are, I exist, gray sweaters exist, I may wear a gray sweater, etc. I am wearing something, and so on and so forth.
Thank
you.
Okay.
Logic.
Don't think about it anymore at all.
It will make your brain shrivel.
It will make your brain shrivel. You're exactly right. Which, by the way, when I said logic, with that tone of voice and that look on my face, that's exactly the kind of thing that logic cannot do.
No.
Right? Because what it was pure context. Okay, and we're going to talk about contextualization cues in a few chapters, and you will see that that's exactly what a contextualization cue is. That is that by making that face and using that intonation and that kind of gesture, like what you're going to do, I was sending a message that said, I'm saying this word, and I'm just saying a word, but I'm conveying an attitude towards it. And you all knew what it was, right? Because you all knew exactly what I meant when I said logic, right?
Is that because we all speak English and understand it, or is it because those?
No, it's more than that.
Okay.
You speak English, you understand it, and you share the cultural set of knowledge
Okay.
that allows you to understand that contextualization cue.
Okay.
So it's more than just knowing English and speaking it. It's also being part of a culture.
The culture. Yeah. Okay. So then, when you're teaching cow, the animal, versus cow, the behavior,
Yes.
how is that, if you're teaching it to language learners,
Yeah.
then how do you need to know what their word or their, no?
No, because
Okay.
it's just a lexical difference.
Lexical. Okay,
It's just a
so,
lexical. It's a homonym. You know, there are two words that have the same sounds, but they're different meanings.
Right.
So there's no. It's not a pragmatic problem. It's a lexical problem.
Lexical.
So
Okay.
you don't need
Okay.
pragmatics for that.
Okay.
It's like using a Ferrari to go get your mail at the mailbox.
Mailbox at the end of the drive.
Right, exactly.
I have a question, and I don't know if
Yes.
it's or I don't know if you already talked about it, but about the whole semantics and pragmatics, the boundary.
Yeah.
I guess I just wanted to clarify, because they both have to do with meaning, pragmatics and semantics. But
Yeah.
in the book it said that pragmatics was meaning minus the truth conditions, but then that semantics was more, I guess, like the more objective, I guess. But at the same time, it's not necessarily because of
Which one was more objective?
the semantics. No.
Yeah. Right, okay. Yes. Yeah. I mean.
Semantics, yeah.
Okay. Now, mind you, I would not say that in you know, polite society, but I know
Okay.
what you mean. That's okay. Just don't say it anywhere outside this room.
Okay. Because I wanted to make sense of it,
Don't go
because
to
I
the
wasn't.
pragmatics, the meetings of the Pragmatic Society and say that. Okay.
Okay. Deal. Okay.
All right. So you want to know the boundary between pragmatics and semantics. That's the question, right?
Right, because in the book, I mean, I understand why they crossed that boundary, but then now I don't know exactly what the boundary is,
Right.
so to speak.
Well, no, you're correct, because I mean the point that I make in the book is good luck finding a boundary.
Right.
Okay, ain't gonna happen, buddy. Okay, so but you know, I mean, you know, if you've got nothing else to do and time on your hands, sure, you can try and find a boundary, and we'll probably come up with something brilliant, except it won't work.
Okay.
You know, but I mean, sure, you know, I mean, you know, you can try, and people have tried repeatedly, and it just doesn't work. You know, it's impossible to draw a firm boundary between the two that's theoretically motivated. That is, you know, we can say, oh, we're going to draw the boundary here, and yeah, sure, but it doesn't serve any practical purpose because it's not theoretically motivated. And as I said, you know, the field has been moving away from the idea that you can draw a boundary between the two about as fast as a Ferrari going on the Formula One circuit, you know, in the opposite direction of that idea. You know, because I mean, the moment, you know, with relevance theory, we talked about earlier, you know, the explicatures and these things, you know, where, you know, even to get to the meaning of a sentence, you need cartloads of pragmatics. You know,
right.
You need the ictics, you need the disambiguation, you need the explicatures. So even before you can say the literal meaning of the sentence is X, you've already brought in large amounts of pragmatics, right? And that's even before you determine what the implicatures are and what did you really mean by saying that, okay? So, so pragmatics is all over semantics, and it's very, very hard, as I said, in my mind, impossible to draw a boundary between the two.
Okay.
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 But, you know, people have tried to do it, and, you know, the formula that you quoted, you know, meaning without truth conditions, is not a silly attempt. It's a clever attempt. It just doesn't work.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question. Hopefully it's not that long to answer, but are frames and scripts the exact same thing, or is there difference?
No, they're exactly the same thing.
Okay.
It's like frames is the terminology that Chuck Fillmore used, and that's been successful in artificial intelligence and so on. And scripts is the terminology that my former mentor, Victor Raskin, used, and that's been successful in reading theory.
Okay.
So you find, you know, but they're the same thing. They're indistinguishable.
Okay.
If you want, I've got a 40-page paper on that. Anyone there? No takers. Jennifer,
Oh.
nothing.
Also, the signified equals referent equals thought. Is that okay to think of it that way?
Okay, so the signified is the referent. Now, if you bring in thoughts, then yes, you're correct, because it's never the actual referent. Except that logicians at this point would jump out of the window. Okay, because the moment you say thought, the logicians have a conniption. Okay, so you know, it's a bit complicated, but basically, you know, I mean, the easier way, which is what I do in the book, is I say, don't think of thought, think of the real thing in the real world. That's what it refers to, is an actual object in the world.
So it would be okay to say the signified equals referent, and sometimes that equals thought.
Well, yes, that's very true. Okay, so if I say, for example, infinity, not the car, okay, I mean like the mathematical concept. What referent could you possibly have for that? Or freedom? What referent do you have? What, you know, if I said, okay, tomorrow for class, bring you know, the actual freedom. You can't bring anything to class, right? I mean, it's just not gonna work, right? Because there is no object freedom. It's a thought, right? It's an abstraction, right? So obviously, yes, there are definitely some reference that are pure abstraction, pure thought.
Unless it's the name of a person. Sorry.
Say it again?
Sorry. Unless it's the name of a person, then you could bring the actual person freedom.
Right.
Sorry, I'm just joking.
No. You know, but you're right. I mean, that's the thing, is that there's always you know, that's again pragmatics at work, right? How do you know that by freedom we mean the person named freedom, or, you know, the actual concept of freedom? Maybe it's a horse named freedom, right? I mean, surely there's horses named
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So again, that's pragmatics.
Okay, thank you.
Good. These are very good questions. I'm quite happy that you're asking them. It was good. All right. Any other questions? I think we seem to be winding down here. Yes.
Can I just ask about the CR one from Friday?
Yeah.
Does it just cover chapter 1?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I thought I'd make everybody's life simple. Chapter 1, comprehension review 1.
Okay.
So cleverly, CR1 covers chapter 7.
Ah.
You'll never guess that. That's, you know, okay. No, of course it covers chapter 1. It's very, very simple and straightforward. The only place where it's complicated is that we are in week 2 or 3, and we're doing chapter 1, because things got crossed out for reasons that we better not go over again. You know, so it was supposed to be week 2, chapter 1. It's week 3, and we're on chapter 1. Other than that, nothing else has changed.
Okay, great.
All right. Anything else?
Is this the structure of how the class is gonna, you're not gonna have a lecture? with
No,
questions?
as I said, this is a flipped class. So, which by the way, I'm with Randy. So this is a flipped class. The lecture is the book, and then you come here with discussion, right? I mean, this is the perfect kind of class for a flipped classroom. You know, I mean,
Because it's hybrid or because of the subject?
because of both, because, you know, it's better to spend the time that we have together discussing questions, and you can ask me interactively and say, wait, is it a negation or is not a negation, and whatever, right? So we can get into it, or we can say, let's go down the rabbit hole and then pursue this thing and, you know, see what happens. Yeah, we can do all of that. You know, I can stand here and give you a 3-hour lecture on semantics. I'll have a great time because I enjoy lecturing on pretty much anything, right? So, you know, I'll have a great time, but the chapter in the book is a better lecture than I can give you in 3 hours. It would take me 7 hours to reproduce what's in the book, right? So it's better that way. And then we can spend the time in a classroom having a discussion and making sure that we understand everything, you know. So I think it's more valuable to do it this way, and I enjoy doing it long distance because usually people don't do flipped classroom long distance. So I like to make a point that it can be done. Okay, so it's like this works on so many levels. It's you know, it's astonishing they pay me to do this, you know, because it's like, hey, guys having so much fun, you know, you'd think I'd do it for free. No, I don't. All right. Okay, so any other questions, anyone? Or are we tired? Is it time to, well, for Sharon, it's morning, right? You know, like you're about to go have a full day, you know. I'm about to go have dinner, but all right. So thank you everybody for coming. This was awesome. I had a great time. I hope you did as well. And, you know, if you then have further questions, we do have now another couple of days for the discussion where we can ask more questions and answer them. And then the comprehension review will start Friday morning at 00 a.m. And then you have until Sunday to turn it in. Okay?
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye, everyone.